In this part of episode 2, I want to talk to you about subtracting integers. Now, the subtraction symbol is given by this horizontal bar, right? So if I wanted to say 7 take away 4, I would say 7 horizontal bar and then a 4. Now, if I want to subtract a negative number from a positive number, then I could say something like 7 minus negative 3. But just like with addition, it's really kind of messy to have two symbols right next to each other like that, the subtraction symbol and the minus sign. So that's too messy, so we separate those symbols using parentheses. That way it's really clear to the reader, 7 subtract negative 3. Or I could also say something like, if I wanted to do negative 8, take away 5 from that, negative 8 minus 5. Or I could do something like negative 8 minus negative 6. But we don't want to have two symbols right next to each other like that. So we separate the minus and the subtraction using parentheses. Negative 8 minus negative 6. Now, to talk about how we subtract integers, I want to talk about something called opposites. Opposite takes a negative number and turns it into a positive number, and vice versa. Opposite of negative 5, for example, is the positive version of that same number, positive 5. The opposite of a number that's positive to begin with, for example, 8, is the negative version of that same number, negative 8. So negative numbers become positive when you take their opposite. Positive numbers become negative when you take their opposite. 0 is kind of a special case because if you take the opposite of 0, the opposite of 0 is just 0 again. Because 0 is neither positive nor negative, the opposite is still just 0, which is also neither positive nor negative. So this is how opposites work. When I talk about the opposite of a number, I'm just talking about switch positive to negative and switch negative to positive. Now, symbolically, if you want to represent the opposite using symbols, the symbol for opposite is exactly the same minus sign we've been using all of this time. So for example, if I wanted to symbolically talk to you about the opposite of negative 5, then I would write that in symbols as minus sign 5. And then I would use parentheses to separate those two consecutive minuses. And if I wanted to say the opposite of 3, then I would write that in symbols as just minus sign on the 3. And that makes sense because the opposite of positive 3 would just be negative 3 with this minus sign attached. So opposites. The symbol for an opposite is just a minus sign, and opposites just have the effect that they change negative to positive and they change positive to negative. Now that we know about opposites, we can talk about how we subtract integers. And the secret is that if you know how to add integers together, like we talked about in part 2, you automatically also know how to subtract integers. Because if you want to subtract integers, for example, if you want to take 5 minus negative 3, then you can complete 5 minus negative 3 by just adding the opposite of negative 3. add the opposite of negative 3. So 5 minus negative 3 would be equivalent to 5 add positive 3. Minus a negative is the same thing as adding a positive. 5 plus 3 would give us 8. Now let's think about this from the perspective of money, and let's see why this kind of thing makes sense. If I'm doing 5 minus negative 3, what I'm essentially doing here is removing a debt. Someone just comes along and says, hey, I'm canceling your student loan debt. I'm canceling your credit card debt. This debt is removed. I am a very happy person if my debt is removed, because if my debt is removed, I'm going to be better off than I was when I started. If I remove a debt, that is good for me. That has a positive effect. Removing a debt is just as good as if someone had paid me $3 so I could pay off the debt myself. It doesn't matter which action this person takes, I benefit exactly the same way. If this person just cancels my $3 debt, that is having the same effect on my finances as if they paid me $3 and they added $3 to me so I could pay off that debt myself. And so that's what we're seeing here mathematically. Subtracting a negative number, removing that debt, is having the same effect as adding a positive number, like they just gave me that $3. Let me show you another example of how this works. For example, if somebody said to me that I'm thinking about negative 7 minus 5, I could think about this not as subtracting 5, but as adding the opposite of 5. Negative 7, add the opposite of 5. Negative 7, add minus 5. Add the opposite. Now, we can add this opposite using, for example, a number line. If I want to add negative 7 and negative 5, I would start at negative 7 and then I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units in the negative direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative 8, negative 9, negative 10, negative 11, negative 12. Negative 12 would be the result of negative 7 combined with negative 5. And that makes sense, right? What's happening here is that I'm already in debt, and then someone comes along and tries to take even more of my money. If they take $5 away from me, if they subtract $5 from what I have, I'm even worse off than I was when I started, right? If they subtract $5 from me, I'm even more in debt and more in trouble than I was at the beginning. So I went from negative 7 down to negative 12. But someone taking $5 from me has a similar bad effect as if someone gave me their debt of $5. If I took on somebody's $5 loan so that I have to pay $5 into that loan, that's just as bad for me as if someone just took the $5 directly out of my pocket to pay their loan themselves. Now, finally, if you're doing subtraction with really large numbers, it can be most convenient to use a calculator. So suppose that I wanted to do a calculation like this one. Now in the calculator, I'm going to type in negative, so here's the negative symbol down here, 512. That was my first number in here, negative 512. The next thing that I want to do is type in the subtraction symbol. And remember that the subtraction symbol is different from the symbol to make things negative. The subtraction symbol is here in this right column. Here's the subtraction symbol. Then I'm going to type parentheses, and then I'm going to type in negative 718. And if I type in negative 718 into the calculator, now I want to use this make the number negative button down here on the bottom right. Negative 718. Enter. So from that, I get 206 for my result, positive. So I am correct. I have a positive number in the end because I removed more negativity than I had at the start. So in the end, I was left with a certain amount of positivity from this. Now to note, because subtraction is the same thing as adding the opposite, if I subtract negative 718, that's the same thing in the end as adding positive 718. If I do this calculation, I'll get exactly the same result. And it's a little bit easier to type in as well. So that's nice. I'll still get 206 from that. Now that we have talked about how to do addition and subtraction, let's talk about a couple of real-world situations where addition and subtraction would be used. So let's suppose that I am starting out and I have $17 in my bank account right now. Starting with that $17 in the bank account, then I'm going to go to the store, but I'm going to spend $23 in the store. If I have 17 and I spend 23, what is showing up in my bank account after doing that transaction? So to represent this scenario, I'm going to start with 17, but then I'm going to try to take away $23 from that 17. Because I'm taking away more money than I have, I'm going to be left with a debt. I'm going to be left with a number that represents I did not have enough money to cover this transaction. So if I go to the calculator and type in 17 subtract 23, subtraction symbol here on the far right, I can see, yeah, from that calculation, I am getting negative 6 for the result, negative 6. So I'm in a bit of trouble now, right? I spent more than I had, so now there's a negative value in my bank account, negative $6. Now the bank says, oh, she's got a negative number in her bank account, so I'm going to apply an overdraft fee. You don't have any money, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to charge you even more money and make you even more poor, right? Because you weren't able to cover this trip to the grocery store. So if the bank now hits me with an overdraft fee of $40, now what is the balance in the bank account? So my bank account was already in bad shape with the negative 6, but now the bank has added on this fee of negative $40. Or if you want to put it a different way, you can think about this as negative 6, and then the bank came and demanded $40 extra from me. So the bank is subtracting $40 from me. This is going to be the same in the end because subtracting a number is the same as adding its opposite. So both of these are going to be the same in the end. Now let's go to the calculator and enter one of these two values and see what we get. So for example, if I want to do negative 6, and here's the negative symbol, right? Negative 6, and I want to subtract 40, the result of that is going to be negative $46. And that makes sense, right? Because I was already in bad shape. Then the bank came and charged me even more money. So now I'm even worse off than I was before. So then I go to my boss. I'm like, look, I'm in big trouble. Could you give me an advance on my paycheck? Or I go and I sign up for Uber or I sign up for DoorDash and I hustle really fast and I get myself some money and I'm able to deposit $120 into my account. If I deposit $120 into my account to cover this problem here, what is left in my bank account after that deposit? So I'm starting off in bad condition, but now I'm able to add $120 to cover my fees. So if I do that calculation, negative 46 plus 120, I am left in the end with $74 as a result of that transaction. $74 in the bank account in the end.